Hello, my name is Danny Williams. I'm in Orono, Maine. Today is June 20th, 2013. And today I'm going to tell you a story. It's a true story, and it's about me. I'm an adopted child, and about 22 years ago, I did a search for my biological family. Now, one of the questions that is asked about being adopted is, did I know that I was adopted? And the answer is yes. I've known I was adopted my entire life. There was never a time when my parents, or that I can remember, that my parents sat me down and told me that I was adopted. What's interesting is that my parents didn't think they could have children at the time I was adopted. 2 years later, my mother got pregnant and had a child, and then a second child. So I have two brothers that are biological to my parents, and I, of course, am not biological to my parents. So the reason I decided to search for my biological family initially was for medical reasons. And that's a very common thing for children who are adopted, to want to know about their genetics. That's something, obviously, that I didn't know anything about. So although that was the initial reason I decided to search, as I began to search and as I began to learn more about adopted children and parents who give children up for adoption, I learned that there's much more to it, that at a very fundamental level, this was a search about who I am as a person. Where do I come from? A very basic and a very fundamental question that most people know the answer to, but I did not. And growing up, there was never an issue in being adopted. There were no family issues related to my adoption. And I never felt like there was anything missing. I was raised in a wonderful, loving home, caring home, and I never realized there was something missing until I did this search, and I sort of put that piece into place. So I'll take you back to 1991, which was about when I started to think about doing this search. And my parents had always, as I said, I always knew I was adopted, and I knew I was adopted in New York. And so when I started thinking about searching for my biological family, I wrote some information, I wrote and requested some information from the adoption agency. This was a private adoption, and the agency sent me some literature, and that literature sat on my desk for about 2.5 years before I did anything. And 1993, going into 1994, I was a graduate student here at the University of Maine. And one of the reasons adopted children, there are many reasons that adopted children decide to search for their family, or their biological family, but one of the reasons is there's an event typically at around the age that I was, which was at that point 22, 23, 24. That's the age when a lot of times people are getting married, they're having children, a parent dies, or some major life event occurs that sort of gives you pause to think and reflect about who am I, where am I going? You know, these big questions, these big life questions. And in 1994, I was going to be done graduate school, and I had no idea what I wanted to do. So these big questions about life and the existence of life and what am I going to do in life came up. And so in 1991, I requested the information, but it sat and I didn't do anything until about 1993, 94, when these questions started to come up. At that time, my parents, who raised me, I refer to them as my parents were divorced. My mother was living in Florida and decided she was going to return to Maine. And the combination of her coming back to Maine, me entering my last year into graduate school, I thought, it's time for me to do this search. And I didn't want to do this search without my mother. And obviously, for my mother, this was a very emotional experience for her because she didn't know what the outcome